Hey class, this is Dr. Scott Jameson. We are doing Anatomy and Physiology 1 lab. Video is in case we are online in the fall. I'm doing this in July or June, late June actually. Just recording this just in case. So we'll see if we're online or if we're in class. If we're in class and you miss class, then you can watch these videos and you'll get pretty much the same experience as if you were in class. So that's the cool part. Anyway, but I'm going to do this and run through all the stuff for today. So this would be Anatomy and Physiology Lab number 1. And in class, we went over the syllabus. That'll be online. You can see that in Momentum. We also have a lab safety sheet that you need to sign and get back to me. And we'll do that in class, hopefully. If you missed class for some reason, you'll need to do one of those, and I can give you a copy of that. That'll also be online that you can sign and scan and email to me. We're going to do a course overview in the next few slides. And then we're going to talk about anatomical language. We're going to talk about this is the first lab. We're going to talk about just introducing anatomy and physiology. So this will be the reference anatomical position, what that is. We're going to talk about directional terms. We're going to talk about body regions. We're going to talk about body cavities, membranes that are in those regions, in those cavities and regions. And we're going to talk about abdominal pelvic regions because those are useful for clinical evaluation. And we're going to talk about planes and sections. Okay, next slide. So, what is anatomy and physiology? What's this course all about? Well, you've got two parts. You have the lecture and you have the lab. The lecture, you're going to do a lot more physiology, which is really more chemistry, I guess, in a way, of the body. You're going to talk about hormones. You'll talk about ions, calcium ions and potassium ions and electrolytes, and talk about fluids and how things work together. In anatomy, that's what we're going to do mostly in the lab. We're going to do more anatomy in the lab and you'll do more physiology in the lecture. Anatomy really comes from the Greek term temnein, to cut, anatomia, cutting. So it's a study of the structure of things. Physiology really comes from the Greek and Latin physiologia, physio meaning nature, logia, study of the function of things. So physiology is how we pronounce it today. It's a branch of biology that deals with the normal functions of living organisms and their parts. So in the lab, we're going to deal with the structures. We're going to deal with, like, what is a bone? What does it look like? What's its shape? And in lecture, you're going to deal with the function. How does that bone move? What makes it move? What are the chemicals inside a bone? You're going to talk more about that kind of stuff. And the lab and lecture will overlap, so you'll hear a lot of some of the same stuff in both. But in lab, hopefully hopefully we're in person and you can see things in person in lab. That's really a whole lot better. But I understand with the virus that may not be possible, so we will keep our fingers crossed so we can get to be together. All right, next slide. So in AP1 lab, we have 14 lab meetings. There'll be 13 or 14 quizzes, probably 14, one over every single topic that we're going to cover. And I'm just going to run through the topics. These are in the syllabus, but just so you hear them and I can describe what they're about. If anyone has any questions, you can email me or ask me in class. So today we're doing the intro to anatomy and physiology and an anatomical language. We'll do organ systems, metric system, microscope, and cell structure. We'll do the cell cycle, transport, osmosis, scientific method. We'll do histology, which is tissues, talk about what tissues are. That'll be actually that'll be a long lecture there. So there's a lot of tissues and we do them all in one thing. So put your thinking hats on because you'll need them that day. Then we'll do intro to skeletal system and bone tissue. We'll do the axial skeleton, which is the skull and the vertebral column. Do the appendicular skeleton, which is arms and legs. Then we'll talk about joints and movement. Then we'll do the intro to the nervous system and nervous tissue. We'll do brain structure and function, spinal cord. And then we'll do the cranial and spinal nerves and somatic reflexes. And then we'll do the endocrine system and integumentary system. And those may be reversed, or integumentary system may be somewhere else in this order. That's a floating lab, so depending on how the schedule hadn't come out yet for the fall. So that may pop right in the middle of the semester. I'm not sure where that'll fit. But but it's one that can be done separate from all the other labs, so it's a floating lab in case we need to work around a holiday or something like that, like fall break. Anyway, next slide. So anatomy and physiology, if you've heard about it before, people say it's a lot of work, a lot of memorization, and it is. There's a lot of things that the problem is the terms are all generally new, so you're learning a new language in a way. And so how do you learn all this? Well, one way to think about it is how do you eat an elephant? You eat it one bite at a time. So if you take just little tiny chunks of this, then it makes it a whole lot easier. I'm going to go over the next couple slides of some techniques for learning anatomy and physiology and things that can make it easier for you. But just remember, take it in small chunks. Don't try to cram for tests. Try to learn it a little bit at a time, and it'll make it a lot easier on you. All right, next slide. So how to succeed in this class. Organize yourself. You'll need to give yourself enough time to learn all the things, learn all the terms, and the best way to do this is to visualize. So, and the nice thing about anatomy is you've got the parts right in front of you. So when we talk about the hand, you can talk about the digits. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 digits, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the thumb. These are the fingers. And we talk about the bones that are in the hand, and you can actually feel those and say, okay, this is a metacarpal, and this is the carpals here. So carpals, metacarpals, and we have the phalanges. There's 3 of those in the index finger. So you can touch all these, and so you actually can feel them, and so it helps you visualize things. But give yourself enough time to learn these things. If you spend a little time every day, it helps a whole lot, and your brain processes things and you can remember them. Also, you want to visualize them. So get your bearings. Visualize the area, region, structure in your head. Look at the pictures in the chapter before class. Do the pre-lab questions. Although you won't be able to answer the pre-lab questions, but try to go through them and sort of give them a shot, or at least look through the questions, and then that'll trigger things as we're going through class. Memorization, use your book and other aids. I'll post videos. I'll give you study guides for the chapters, and draw things for yourselves. Start with large structures and then move to smaller structures that are around those large structures. So you can start with saying, like, here's the brain, or here's the skull. Think about that. So you got the skull, and then you start thinking about the different bones that make up the skull, and that helps if you take all those parts and put them into categories. So here's all the bones of the skull. So instead of trying to remember just like a bone just by itself and then trying to place it is difficult if you learn just by itself. You'll see as you go on through the semester how this works. Let's see. Link a word to a structure by making a mental picture of it. Define the word. Break the word down to make it recognizable. I try to help you do that throughout the course. I'll break the word down, show you what certain parts of it. I just did that, talking about anatomy and physiology, what those words mean. If you want to go back and look at those couple slides, see how I did that. I'll do that several times through the course. Use acronyms, mnemonics, flashcards, draw things, make a poem, make a song, whatever it takes for you to learn this stuff. Work in study groups, get together with people, and if you guys can get together and talk on Zoom or on if you want, I can set up discussions through Momentum. You guys can talk to each other. I don't have to be there. You can do those yourselves, or I can be with you if you want. Let's see, exams, examination of yourself. So test yourself. So once you learn something, say, okay, what is this bone right here? Okay, well, this is the right manual. This is my right hand. So sorry, my left hand. I was looking at my image in the camera. This is my left hand. So left manual, and this is a phalanx. This is a little tiny bone on the end. These are phalanges. Each one's a phalanx. So left manual phalanx number 1. This is the distal phalanx number 1. So you can test yourself, and then you go back, learn these, then you go back and say, okay, what is this bone right here? And so, well, this is middle phalanx number 5. Is this one right here? This is proximal phalanx number 5. This is distal phalanx number 5 on left manual. So you can learn things by testing yourself. Draw the structure, label it. And I can't emphasize this enough. If you can label the structures, you will help yourself a lot. Okay, so there's your little bit on how to succeed in this class. Next slide. Okay, anatomical language. Words, words, and more words. Why do we care about all this terminology? Well, it's the beginning of learning anatomy and physiology. The terms have been brought up through centuries. Okay, these are not new words that we came up with today. The language is changing some. We used to name things after people. We don't do that as often anymore. We do still have some of those words, but a lot of them they've modified the language and modernized it a little bit, so it's a little bit easier in some ways. And I'll point out some of those things as we go through. The terminology is important because we need to communicate clearly with someone else. In a clinical setting, you want to say someone broke their arm, and they say where, and so then you got to point out where on the arm, and you can point to it. You can say, oh, they broke their forearm, right? Well, which bone of the forearm? There's 2 bones there, right? Or they broke the wrist. Okay, which bone in the wrist? Well, there's 8 bones in the wrist. So it's nice if you know, it's not nice, it's necessary to know all the names of all these things. So I'm going to give you, you won't be able to see this because my camera image is in the way, but I'm going to read this to you. And by the end of class, you'll actually understand what this next paragraph means. So it also may seem overwhelming, but try doing repetition and applying those words to things that you see in your own body, and you can learn it a whole lot easier. So the bullet entered the right posterior scapular region, 3 centimeters lateral to the vertebral region, 4 centimeters inferior to the cervical region, and penetrated deep to the muscle and bone, but superficial to the parietal pleura. So by the end of this class, you'll understand what that means. But I'll go ahead and tell you now. The bullet entered the right posterior scapular region. Scapula is the shoulder blade. It's on the right. Posterior is on the back side. Okay. So the right side, it entered way back here. 3 centimeters lateral to the vertebral region, that's the spinal cord, so it's 3 centimeters lateral to the side, and 4 centimeters inferior to the cervical region. Cervical region is the neck, so it's 4 centimeters down, 3 centimeters over, so it's near the scapula, and it penetrated deep to the muscle and bone, so it went beneath the muscle and bone, but stayed superficial to the parietal pleura. The pleura is the lining that goes around the lungs. So it went well, here's the ribs. So the bullet went through, probably between ribs, and penetrated deep, went through the skin, between the ribs, beneath the bone, but stopped outside of the lung tissue. So the bullet is between the muscle and the lung tissue. So that's what that means. But as we go on through this class, you'll see this, and you'll understand what all those words are. Next slide. Okay, so body position. The reference anatomical position, we need a reference point. So, because if you're talking to somebody, you say, well, it's their right hand, and so you have to know what the right and left are. And you're talking about this, and so we'll talk about what that means. So, but we're always talking about the patient's right or left. Okay. So the anatomical position, you're standing upright, you're facing the observer, the head is level, the eyes are facing forward, feet are flat on the floor, arms at the sides, palms are turned inward. And I would encourage you to stand up right now and practice this on yourself and show it. It's like, so you're standing like that guy is in the picture, okay? And look at yourself and realize your palms are forward, your eyes are forward, your face is forward, your chest is forward, your feet are forward. That's the reference anatomical position. Other body positions you have, there's supine and prone. If you've ever shot a gun, you've probably shot a rifle from the prone position, which is laying down in your stomach. There's also the supine position where the stomach, the abdomen is facing up. Next slide. So directional terms. We have directions in the body. We're 3-dimensional beings, so we are in a 3D world. So we have superior, cranial, inferior caudal, anterior is ventral, posterior is dorsal, lateral, medial, proximal, distal, superficial, deep, left, right. So why can't we just use up, down, inside, and out? Well, directional terms allow you to communicate more precisely and lessens errors in communicating with others. Because what's going to happen is someone's going to have a chart and they're going to write some stuff down on it, and your shift ends or their shift ends, and you come in, and you want to be able to read on the chart something that makes sense. It's in the same language everybody else is using, and the doc's going to write it in this language. You're going to use abbreviations and all that stuff, but what you want to do is be able to know what they did with the patient before you got there. And in order to do that, you have a standard language. So we're using standard terms, standard anatomical position, standard directional terms. So directional terms are almost always used with respect to another structure. So superior and inferior. We're going to see a picture of this pretty soon. It's in your book too. But remember all these pairs of things. It's also, I find it easier to remember one as primary and then the other one as the the secondary one, the other one. So if you're remembering like right and left, which one's which? Well, you can remember left is this hand, and so right would be the other hand. Okay. And if you try to remember pairs of things, sometimes it's easy to get confused. So that might be a trick that you could use. All right, next slide. So superior and inferior. So those are things that are something that's above something else. So the head is superior to the neck. Anterior and cranial and caudal. Cranial means head. Caudal means tail. Okay. Anterior and posterior. Anterior is front. Posterior is back. Ventral is front. Dorsal is back. So if you think of fish with a dorsal fin, that's dorsal. So the breastbone right here is anterior to the backbone, right, where your spinal cord is. Or it's, you're going to say it's ventral as compared to the backbone. Medial and lateral. Medial is in the middle. Lateral is to the sides. Okay. So the breastbone is medial to the ribs. So you're always saying something is something with respect to something else. So the breastbone is medial with respect to the ribs. Right. The breastbone isn't just medial. It's medial to the ribs. Proximal, distal. So that's relative to the point of origin. Proximal is closer to, distal is a further distance away. So that's fairly easy to remember. Distal meaning distance, proximal meaning in proximity to, closer to. So the hand, put it this way, hand is distal. So if you look at shoulder, starting from the trunk, so everything going, this is more proximal and this is more distal. Okay, so the hand is distal to the wrist. The elbow is proximal to the wrist. The elbow is closer to the trunk than the wrist is. So superficial and deep. Ribs are superficial to the lungs. Ribs are outside the lungs. The lungs are inside, right? So they're superficial. You don't use superior and inferior in this case when things are inside that's superficial and deep. Ipsilateral, contralateral. Those are things that are, ipsilateral means on the same side. Contralateral means things that are on opposite sides of the body. So left wrist and the left elbow are ipsilateral. They're on the same side. The left wrist and your right wrist are contralateral. Your left wrist and right ankle are contralateral. They're on opposite sides. Next slide. So here's a diagram showing some of the directional terms. So we have cranial, caudal, so they're head and tail. Posterior or dorsal, anterior or ventral, and we'll use both. We'll use those terms interchangeably. And we have superior and inferior, and then we have right and left. You notice that they're facing you, so this is their right, and this is their left on this side. Okay, so this is left. An easy way to figure out if you have a hard time remembering and flipping things around in your head, you'll get it with practice. But what you can do is you can take your arms and you can cross them. Okay, so that my left hand is now facing towards their left. And if you're like in with a patient or something like that, you just do this real quick, just pop it, and do it low, and they won't even notice what you did. So you can, so you can remember, oh yeah, that's their left side. If for some reason you needed that. So here's proximal, here's distal, and then we have medial and lateral. And also we're here referring to proximal up here, and distal is down here. So the foot is distal to the knee. The knee is proximal to the foot. The hip is proximal to the knee. The knee is distal to the hip. Okay, is the way those go. All right, next slide. Okay, so here's the figure from your guys' book, figure 1.2, showing the same things. This one this was a little busier than the one that I showed you before, so I want to show you that one before, and then we'll bring you to this one, and this, I think, will make a little more sense after seeing that and going through it once. So here we go through it again. So we have superior, cranial, inferior, caudal, anterior or ventral, posterior or dorsal, and that's a lateral view, so you're looking at the guy from the side. Here we have medial and lateral. We have proximal and distal, and then we have proximal distal in the legs. And this is the anterior view midline. So you're looking, anterior view means you're looking at the person's front, okay, like you're looking at me here in the video screen. And then there's superficial and deep. So the bones are deep to the skin is superficial to the bones. Then we have contralateral. So we have foot is contralateral to the ankle, to the left ankle. So the right foot is contralateral to the left ankle. Ipsilateral, meaning on the same side, so the left hand is ipsilateral to the left thigh. And let's see if there's anything else. Okay, I think that's, and this table here is out of your guys' book, so you can, so it has all the definitions in it if you want to look at those. It gives you some examples as well. Okay, next slide. So directional terms, one thing to notice is that directional terms are used in a certain way in humans, but they're used slightly differently in animals. We still have dorsal and ventral. Dorsal meaning the back, okay, and ventral. And this is Layla. This is my son and daughter-in-law's dog at the beach. So Layla is a Labradoodle, some sort of mix like that. So anyway, I think it's 2 Labras and 1 Doodle, I think, together on that one. Anyway, she's a sweet, sweet dog. A lot of fun. And but in 4-legged animals, you have anterior and cranial is here at the head, posterior and caudal down here at the tail. So that's similar. But we also have another term, rostral, is meaning nose, and caudal meaning tail. But you notice that anterior is here at the head. Instead of in humans, anterior would be here. I'm sorry, posterior would be here. Sorry about that. And anterior would be here, okay, on the stomach, right? So this is anterior chest and stomach. This is posterior on us. But in 4-legged creatures, that is not the case. So anterior is at the head. So anterior is the same as cranial. And also rostral, which meaning nose, and posterior is back at the tail, or caudal. So it's in the direction you're going. So if you're thinking of us as bipedal animals, we're walking forward, so that's anterior. Walking backwards is posterior. So like a dog, they're walking forward, and their head's going forward, so that's anterior to them, and walking backwards would be their tails posterior to them. So just so you know, in case you decide to go and be a vet or something like that. There's differences like that between humans and 4-legged animals. All right, next slide. So, and also, I guess you refer to also other animals that walk on 2 legs. You have an anterior and posterior in that too, so are different from there. But here we are in 4-legged animals versus 2-legged animals. So dorsal and ventral, but with us, posterior and dorsal are the same thing, and anterior and ventral are the same thing. All right, next slide. So here's another table of directional terms. I put this here. Also, there's another term that I didn't bring up, cephalic. Okay, that's meaning the head. Okay, and what else? There's another term. Oh, intermediate. That's something that's between 2 structures. So you can think of the heart. You have the lungs, and they have a heart here. So the heart is intermediate to the lungs. It's also medial to the lungs, but when it's between 2 structures, we often refer to it as intermediate. And let's see, I think that was the main things I want to point out there. Okay, next slide. So directional terms are relative. Yes, that's a bad joke. E equals mc squared is the equation for relativity. So yeah. Anyway, it's important to note that the directional terms are often used in relation to something else. So just remember they're always in relation to somewhere else. So the esophagus is posterior to the trachea. The eyes are lateral to the nose. So the nose is here, okay? And the eyes are lateral. So the eyes are lateral to the nose. The nose is medial to the eyes. So the esophagus isn't just posterior, the eyes are not just lateral, the eyes are lateral to the nose. So the directional terms are always referring to something else. Next slide. So there's a lab, this would be a lab activity. We'd be labeling these directional terms. So these are, I believe, all in your book, and they'll be in a handout that I give you. So, well, some of these are in your book. These are in a handout that I give you, so you can do all these yourselves. Next slide. And here they are labeled, so we can go through them, and you can check your own answers as to what is superficial and deep, and contralateral, ipsilateral, proximal, distal, superior, inferior. So the nose is superior to the mouth is inferior to the nose. So you can practice all those things. Next slide. And here you can label directional terms. So anterior, posterior, cranial, caudal, superior, inferior, proximal, distal, those things. All right, next slide. And here's the answers to those. Okay, next slide.